people both in the room and joining us by phone. Modern telephony does its work. Without further ado, I'd like to start to my far right and introduce our panelists. Victor Abate, who is Vice President of Renewable Energy for GE Energy. Senator Tom Daschle, who is a Special Policy Advisor for Alston Bird. Robert Lucafar, President, Power of America's BP Alternative Energy. Carl Rabago, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for AES, Alternate Energy. Steve Sawyer, Secretary General of the Global Wind Energy Council, and not least, Randall Swisher, who is Executive Director for the American Wind Energy Association. And I'd like each panelist to offer a 1, at most 2-minute synopsis of the remarks he offered earlier this morning, and then we'll commence with questions.
We are here in Los Angeles celebrating the 3rd record year for the U.S. wind industry in a row. This year, as last year, the U.S. market for wind will be the largest in the world. There's a huge interest in this market. You can go out on the exhibit floor and see the 419 exhibitors, 90% larger than it was a year ago, the exhibition. This market is taking off. Our focus, as you could tell from the last panel, and I think most of the remarks this morning, is not simply how do we keep that up next year. The issue really is how do we sustain this market for wind in the U.S. over the long term, and how do we maximize wind's market share over time through a long-term, focused, well-analyzed and understood strategy. That's what we've really been looking at over the period of the last year in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Energy, the National Renewable Energy Lab, Black & Veatch, and others, and really all the leading companies in the industry. We are at a point of looking long-term, understanding the very large challenges facing this industry to achieve something like 20% of the electric market. But I think the appetite within the industry for that kind of challenge is there, and we're ready to move out. The board of directors yesterday approved a 5-year action plan to really lay the foundation for this vision of the future of the wind industry. And as soon as we leave Los Angeles, we'll be putting that together and working with our board to implement and execute on maximizing wind's market share in the U.S. over time.
Good morning. My goal was to, or my task rather, was to provide something of an international perspective on the situation and suggest really a few things from the international experience which would be good at the industry, and particularly the policymakers here to be looking at as this industry takes off big time, as the U.S. does become the dominant market, not only this year and next year, but on a total basis by the end of this decade. First of all, that there needs to be policy stability. Policy signals that come from governments to support this industry and others need to be long, at least 15 years in length. They need to be loud in the sense that they're unambiguous and have clear objectives, and they need to be legal in the sense that you can take those measures and take them to the bank and get a low-risk, relatively inexpensive loan to finance your wind project. Second thing I think that's important to keep in mind is that climate change and the issue of how carbon emissions are regulated is increasingly the dominant factor in energy policy, not only here in the United States and around the world. And I think there was a broad agreement that there's going to be a cap on U.S. carbon emissions and some sort of a carbon management system in place within a few years, probably not until after the new administration is inaugurated. And I think looking at both the successes, but particularly at the mistakes that have been made in Europe in the development of the European emissions trading scheme would stand the industry here in very good stead. And if it works, it can be a very powerful tool. If not, then it's just a side industry for the financial services sector. And we certainly want it to work when it comes in here.
Good morning, my name is Carl Rabago. I manage government regulatory affairs for AES's alternative energy business. AES is a global power company in about 26 or so countries. A big part of what we do is our wind energy business, and about over half of that is in Texas. So we see ourselves as being a part of this growing business, and I'm excited to spend an awful lot of my time on it. I had the pleasure of being the moderator on this final session from this morning, the plenary session. My job was to basically let these people say their great thoughts, and so it was pretty easy for me. The question and the sort of the framework for the discussion was founded upon one central point of agreement, however, that is worth bearing out. That is that a significant penetration of wind energy development in the United States, 5, 10, 15, 20% by the year 2030 is possible. And the debate is no more whether or not it's possible. The debate and the discussion and the charge for our industry and then ultimately for this country is, what do we have to do right now to make that happen? Because a vision that big and a vision that long requires not just good planning, as Randy mentioned, but it requires action started today for the several tasks that do in fact have long lead times and the several important issues that have to be resolved to make that happen. And so as somebody from AES, we're very interested in that sort of plan getting launched, and we're interested in being a part of helping to shape and realize it.
I'm Bob Lukefer. I run the Power Americas business unit, part of BP Alternative Energy. BP Alternative Energy is BP's low carbon power business. It has solar, our hydrogen power business, wind, and our natural gas power business. I talked this morning a little bit about our perspective on this challenge, and Carl had posed a question around 20% wind and is it possible? And I answered, and I will say honestly, to say from this vantage point it looks almost impossible, but we believe it is possible. We believe it's possible because we know that there are technologies in the pipeline, we know that there are new ways of doing business that we're starting to craft today and building at scale in a way that we've never done before that will make it possible. And the energy industry has a long history of making what seems to be impossible possible. And I give a couple of examples, and we'll just share one or two with you and say that in the mid-1970s, the deepest well that we drilled under the Gulf of Mexico was in about 500 feet of water. Today, our Atlantis platform runs 7,000 feet in the water, 20,000 feet below the surface. So taking what seems to be impossible and making it possible is something the energy industry has done historically over many, many, many years. And what an extraordinary question to be posing to the wind industry when in 1999, the DOE projected that by 2020, the U.S. would have 3,600 megawatts of wind installed. The industry surpassed that in 2002, 18 years ahead of schedule. So what an extraordinary thing that we find ourselves asking the question, can we get 300 plus gigawatts of wind into the ground by 2030? And the industry saying, yes, we can. There are huge challenges, but yes, we can. And I think that is an extraordinary thing, but there are huge challenges. Unlocking the resources with big transmission lines from the Plains State, making sure that we have a coherent, stable policy regime that we can rely on and a clear playing field, and doing some things as an industry to up our game on safety and siting, to up our game on partnering and sharing risk. So there are a lot of things to do, but it is achievable, and this industry has a track record of delivering what seems to be impossible.
Oftentimes at press conferences, we are asked the questions, and I'm contemplating some of your questions today, and I think there are three pivotal questions that I would answer in anticipation of your interest. Number one, why now? And I believe that the big difference between now and then is climate and carbon, and the tremendous change in political and policy landscape that this new interest in climate is having. We're not there yet. It's only evolving. On a scale of 1 to 100, we may be at about a 2 or 3, but it is happening. The second is what will make it happen more effectively? And I think the answer to that question is a very successful partnership and public-private infrastructure that will allow us to lay the foundation upon which this new industry can be built. But it will require sound public policy as well as innovative investment and commitment to investment across the board. The third and final question is,